Formula One's budget cap has been under incredibly close scrutiny this year. Trouble with inflation, shipping costs, and cost of living rises meant that the top teams felt the squeeze more than they expected. Then, the news broke that Red Bull breached the cap in 2021, and all of a sudden, questions were being asked of whether it even worked. Well, Alpine boss Otmar Szafnauer has now come out and said that it doesn't. But what does he think the problem is, and what can be done about it? Let's check it out. The new Formula One cost cap regulations were a hot topic during the 2022 season. Very early on in the season, Red Bull suggested that potentially 6 teams could be in breach of the cap for the 2022 season. They said rising costs would put everyone over and wanted the cost cap raised to accommodate for that. The cap was raised by 3.1% to help the teams, but that was far less than Red Bull had hoped for. Then, Red Bull Racing was found to be in a minor breach of the 2021 financial regulations. Their $2.2 million overspend saw them fined $7 million and given a 10% reduction in their aero testing time for 2023. Then there was the awkward jokes and conversation between FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem and Red Bull Racing team principal Christian Horner at the 2022 FIA prize-giving gala. All in all, not a great first 2 years for the new rules. To make it even worse though, teams are now finding loopholes in the rules. We've reported it on this channel a few times already, but one of the team bosses has now come out and pointed to the problem. Staff costs have become an area that teams have been trying to exploit. When Red Bull's breach was leaked, there was plenty of speculation about how their superstar aerodynamicist Adrian Newey was paid, and whether Red Bull had found a way to exclude him from the cost cap. That ended up not being the case, but the theory behind the theory was correct. If you could get some staff costs outside of the budget cap, you could gain a huge competitive advantage. When the budget cap first came in, the top teams such as Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari had to cut staff to avoid breaching the cap. At Mercedes, they cut hundreds of staff to bring their $500 million seasonal spend under the $145 million cap. Outside of the top 3 though, very little budget cutting had to be done, if any. The smaller teams benefited from this because their team of 50 designers was no longer trying to outdevelop the 500 designers of Mercedes, for example. The playing field leveled. But if there's one thing F1 teams are good at, it's finding loopholes. And as soon as the top teams found a way of only paying their staff through the F1 team for half of the year, they completely abused it. In a recent interview, Alpine boss Otmar Szafnauer explained what the top teams are doing. What some of the bigger teams are now doing is they're looking to exploit or have a better understanding, and where there are loopholes or some organizational changes you can make to actually stuff more people under the budget cap. They're looking at, yeah, I got rid of 100 people, but now I want to hire back because under the budget cap, I was able to find spots for them where they either don't count as a whole person, or they do some marketing stuff or whatever it is, or they work on a boat for some of the time. We're not there yet. I think they're there already, and that advantage of being right at the beginning does dissipate. It isn't really a secret that the top teams are doing this. Ferrari especially have a whole host of random accessories you can buy that their F1 team can work on during the season to save money. Want a full carbon racing bike with Ferrari branding? They sell it, and it's the F1 team that works on it. But how does this save money? Let's say you have a team of the best designers money can buy working for you, and in total, their wages cost $1 million a year. It could be far more than that, I don't know, but that's a nice round number to work with. You don't need all of them working all year round though. One person might specialize in suspension, and that's great when you're working on suspension, but when you aren't looking to upgrade your suspension, they don't have a huge amount to do. So instead of leaving them to look busy for 6 months while you're paying them huge amounts of money, you let the Ferrari car manufacturer take them on for 6 months. They pay the wages for 6 months, meaning that money isn't coming out of your cost cap for 6 months. If you do that with the whole design team for 6 months of the year, then your wage bill of $1 million gets reduced to $500,000, and all of a sudden you can afford a new front and rear wing for both cars. Imagine how much you could save doing that across the thousands of staff members that a top team employs. Mercedes has actually given us the perfect example of the abuse of this loophole. Mercedes Chief Technical Officer James Allison has taken on the role of Chief Technical Officer, or CTO, for the Ineos Britannia America's Cup team, which has based its team in the Mercedes F1 factory. Allison will probably be fantastic at this job, and the Ineos Britannia team are lucky to have him, but if F1's cost cap wasn't in place, there's no way he'd be giving any of his time to another project. Being CTO of the America's Cup team means he can give a percentage of his time to that project instead of the F1 team, saving Mercedes F1 a large portion of his wages. I'm sure if you dug deeper into the members of the America's Cup team, you'd find a whole host of people who also work on the F1 team. The next question is, should this be allowed? On the one hand, it is against the spirit of the cost cap rules. It can only be described as a loophole that lets teams employ many more staff members than they normally would. But on the other hand, what can you really do about it? Can the FIA say that people working on the Formula 1 teams can only work on the team? Honestly, I don't know if they have that kind of power, and I think it would be incredibly hard to enforce if they did. The FIA needs to spend the time and money to find the fix for this hole though, because it is far too abusable to allow a fair and level playing field to exist. Everyone knew that the first few years of the budget cap was going to throw out problems, and this is just one of many of them. Obviously, each team has their own opinions on the problems and what changes are needed. In a recent interview, Red Bull team boss Christian Horner has given his views on what he would like to see changed among F1's tight budget cap rules. He shed some light on the current state of F1 following the first season with the new cars and effect of the cost cap, which took several years to introduce. Horner was diplomatic when asked about whether the FIA, motorsport's governing body, could take F1 to the next level in years to come under the presidency of Mohammed Ben Sulayem. The FIA has obviously been going through significant change, either its new stewardship or its leadership, and all aspects of the business were all learning, said Horner. At no point does anyone know it all, and that's whether you're a team, the FIA, the promoter, there's always things that we can do better. I don't think there's any single area that you would ever say that's perfect, and I think that's the same as with a team. So there's always going to be constant evolution, and as long as that willingness is there, then things can only get better. This season has been rife with rumours of Formula 1 splitting away from the FIA, a move that would see Formula 1 management take over the governance of the sport and create their own set of technical and racing rules for the sport. For fans, little would change, but for the teams, it would be a big shift in how things are run, including a big increase in their power over rules changes. When Liberty Media took over from Bernie Ecclestone in 2017, F1 was presiding over the worst governance process in its 70-year history. 6 teams were granted disproportionate voting powers, with unanimity needed for minor technical and sporting rule changes. For 2021 to 25, this process was refined to enable more equal voting rights on sporting and technical matters. If there is a vote in the F1 committee, 30 votes are distributed, 1 per team, 10 for the F1 bosses and 10 for the FIA. This means smaller teams now have the ability to introduce rule changes that can affect the bigger teams, much to the frustration of Horner. One could argue that little teams have too great a voice on implementing a significant rule that can affect the top teams, with things that quite simply don't affect them, he explained. Particularly through the budget cap, I think that's where the FIA and the promoter really need to look at. Like we said earlier in the video, Horner was the loudest campaigner for an increase in the budget cap earlier in the season, and obviously his point of view on that has not changed. The budget cap is a huge help to all the teams outside of the top 3. Having the spending of Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull limited means that the other teams actually have a chance of competing, though we'll have to wait a few more seasons to see if they actually can or not. The bottom line of all of this is that Formula 1 is an entertainment product, therefore it needs to be as entertaining as possible. Apart from the most die-hard of Mercedes fans, no one enjoyed the seasons where they absolutely destroyed the competition from 2014 to 2020. There were some closer years, but watching Lewis walk to victory in 2020 wasn't very entertaining or memorable. The title fight in 2021 certainly was though. Then in 2022, watching Verstappen dominate was pretty uninteresting for many fans. The best viewer experience in Formula 1 is when there are multiple teams in with a chance of a race win and a title challenge that goes down to the last 2 or 3 races. But can the FIA plug the budget cap loophole that might stop that from happening? Or will the top teams take control of the sport and raise the cap to help them win in the near future? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below, and until next time, drive safe and bye for now.